awfully happy on my part to be back here with you folks. I don't know exactly how long it's been. It's been 2 or 3 months, hasn't it? Last weekend I spent with Glenn Clark and Agnes Sanford and the rest of the dear folk, the dear hearts and gentle people up in the Twin Cities at their midwinter retreat that they have begun this year. And I guess you folks were with, or Agnes was with you, wasn't she, a couple of nights after that? Well, all of those things are thrilling. And something that John was saying here just after you'd cut off this broadcast made me think of that, because it is true that whenever you have a group of people gather together that are close in harmony, you almost feel electric sparks just flying around. I think that is just a very faint indication of what Pentecost holds for us. And I believe that the movement of the world's history is toward Pentecost. I believe that all these things that are tending now to draw us closer together in time and space, that all those things are to confront us with the necessity of Pentecost. As long as we can live apart, why, we don't face that necessity. We don't realize what is there. But when we are thrown more and more together into coal strikes and into all sorts of things like that, to impress upon us the necessity of learning to live as one. And gradually we become more and more aware of that. And also, this is a thing that I have been thinking about a great deal recently. It's been reinforced in my mind by the fact that the Lenten season began Wednesday. But, Jesus said, and we're just barely coming up to the verge of what the meaning of his teachings are. There's so much greater depth of reality behind them than we have any idea. But he said the way to life is narrow, and few are they who find it. Well, I don't want to emphasize the few are they who find it. I want to emphasize the fact that the way to life is narrow. And as we think about all of the discovery of power in recent times, why, we immediately sense how narrow that way is. Look at what had to be done to release the power in the atom. Now, I'm not going to talk about atomic bombs, just about power. Because power always, when it's in an uncontrolled state, is destructive. When it's in a controlled state, then it's beneficial. And life is power. And look at the narrow thing that they had to go through to release the power in the atom. Well, in the same way, in our lives, we have to go through that narrow way. Then immediately we strike life. Then it begins to expand. It doesn't stay narrow in that same sense. But once, in order to get through the eye of the needle, in order to get through the surrounding protons and interferences to the nucleus of the atom, in order to get through all of the defenses and everything that we put up, it has to be awfully narrow. And so, I think as you think about lives now, as you return to lives of power, it's very interesting and very instructive to me to see that every one of them have had to through some kind of a stripping, some kind of a narrow path in which they dropped everything. Now take Stanley Jones, for example. Stanley Jones was a missionary in India, but he went over with the usual ideas about a religion that we grow up with in our own country, where we haven't been put to any test, particularly. Something happened to Stanley Jones. He had a genuine experience, but he went over there with, as he says himself, with a lot of ideas of orthodoxy and one thing and another. And the result was, when he got over there, he found out that he couldn't break through. And so gradually he had to drop one thing after the other. Drop them, drop them, drop them, until finally he came down to one thing, which was Jesus. And then his message began to go through the gate and to strike power. It didn't strike power until that happened. Now, Glenn Clark had to go through a nervous breakdown, you might say. At least a condition where the doctors told him that he wouldn't have long to live. And he apparently had to break through realms of fear and of uncertainty and hesitation and all that sort of thing. And when he got through to that area of peace, to where he contacted life, I'm getting so that I think about this thing of life as just like an electric something that you wire that you take hold of. And but you have to get through all the insulation of that. And then when you strike it, you see, immediately power comes forth. Look at Starr Daily. Don't have to say anything about him. I don't know how much Agnes Sanford has said in your presence, but she mentioned up there at St. Paul of a period that she had to go through. A period when she apparently suffered terrifically, and it affected her mind so that she seemed to be unbalanced. But instead of staying just with people of our own day and whom we know personally, go back and think of others. Think of John Bunyan, what he had to go through with, you see, before he struck that note of power. Think what some of those in the present war experience over there had to go through. I just read one recently, can't think of the name of it, but one that the wider Quaker Fellowship sent out to their members. And that again illustrates that same process of where had to go through shedding one thing after the other. But turn back to Jesus again, and so many of the illustrations that he used in his figures of the kingdom of heaven is like unto the pearl merchant, and so forth, who had to sell all that he had. We're in those stories. Maybe I can't speak for you. Maybe I can only speak for myself. But in those stories, I always thought about the wonderful pearl that he got. I perhaps didn't think enough about the fact that he had to sell everything that he had to get that pearl. I was thinking about the wonderful pearl that he got. And of course, we all want to think about that. But nevertheless, we don't want to forget that the way to life, the way to get it, so forth, is this other process. Now, this is the way in which it's facing me now. You see, I'm in a work where we have to sort of hurl ourselves against the obstructions that are in the minds and attitudes of people. Now, just today, I heard about a little illustration where a tiff arose, a disagreement arose between two men who had been friends for years, and had worked closely together. But something came up regarding authority, and one man wanted a man, and that was going to to leave the other man crippled, and so, well, who was boss around here, and so forth and so on, and so finally one man took the other man, but it developed into a breach. And so the first man decided, all right, he was going to quit. Well, now, he didn't do this for any Christian purpose. But after he quit, the man that was over him called him and another man in and said, well, now, what are we going to do? Because the part of the process that this first man handled was a very delicate process. One person couldn't just pick it up and handle it. And, well, they had no answer. And so the top man said, well, all right, you're sure you have no answer? The man said, well, no, I guess I don't. All right, then he said, I'll give you the answer. He said, you go to that man, to his house, and you tell him that you want him to come back and go to work. And he said, you can also tell him that I authorize you to offer him an increase in salary. Oh, listen, he said, don't ask me to do that. You see, his pride was at stake. The fact that this thing had come up between them, he was still aroused inside. And yet in that instance, they cared enough about this particular industrial process so that finally the fellow said, well, all right, if that's what I've got to do, I'll go ahead and do it. And he did it. The way to life was narrow, very narrow to him. And here, just for a mere industrial process, which in the long run doesn't amount to that maybe. But just for that, in that case, he went through. Now, when he came back, he and this other fellow came along arm in arm. They were friends again. It had cost him this pride, so forth, but he had touched life again. And it's the same way every single place. Every single place. And today, where we are faced with all of these threatening things, and all of the problems that this world situation has brought upon us, well, we've got to get ready and strip down to fighting weight or whatever you want to call it, strip down away from all of these other things and go through and touch life. Touch the power that can bring the thing. Take Francis of Assisi, one of my favorites, St. Francis. Because what did he do? He symbolized the thing with a dramatic power. He stood out in the public square. I don't know, maybe they did this sort of thing in Italy at that time. But at any rate, he stood out in the public square and literally stripped himself naked and said, I own nothing. And friends rushed out and threw a cloak around his nakedness. But he dramatized the fact that he was giving up everything for everything. You see, he really gave up nothing for everything. But when you're on the other side, you think you're giving up everything for what at the moment may seem to be nothing. Well, as I go back and the few experiences in my own life, I don't mean to say that I've given up everything, because I haven't. But nevertheless, in the experiences in my own life where I have been faced with a certain thing, I have always had to give up the thing that was the barrier, you see. And I remember very vividly one time when I awoke to myself for the first time and realized the cad, the hypocrite, the liar, the thief, all that I had been. And I knew then that I was going to have to make a clean breast of the whole thing. And I felt as though I was just going to be tearing down everything that I had spent my life building up to that point. And I felt that my wife would have every right to just kick me out like so much dirt and say, well, you good for nothing, get out of here. And to my amazement, and I mean amazement, when I made the clean breast of the whole thing, now I want to say it wasn't outwardly anything so bad. It was the inner thing. But at any rate, when I made that clean breast, instead of having torn down something that seemed to, well, that I'd spent my life building up, it seemed to me as though I'd just torn down an old shack that had been over my head and had been keeping the sunlight away from me. And for the first time, I was standing out in God's sunshine. And my dear wife, instead of kicking me out the door, embraced me and was closer to me than I had ever been, than we had ever been. Because when you have all these wrappings around you, how can anyone be close to you? You can't. As long as we love ourselves, we can't truly love anyone else. And so when I stripped those things away, why, it was an utterly new life, new experience. So you can turn any place you want and you'll find the same principle emphasized. You can even turn to science. Take the little illustration of the camera. What happens there? Well, the only way you get the reflection on this side is by having, and they say that the ideal lens for a camera is a pinhole, just as small as it can be. And then every one of the rays of light from this picture out here, if there were a picture were being taken of this crowd, every one of those rays of light has to pass through that one pinhole. But then it expands on the other side. And the point is, you see, that there is something to pass over. You might say from death into life. Or there is, but I like to think of it as just from this life into the kingdom of heaven life. Because remember what Jesus said when he said, among men born of women, none is greater than John the Baptist. And yet the least in the kingdom of heaven, in other words, those that have crossed over this line, through this process, the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Well, not because that there is anything inherent in the person, but simply because you're related now to dynamic power. And so, at this weekend, up there, Glenn talked, and I don't think that it was on the recording that you were listening to, although I don't know. But he said he wished that we'd all pick out something daring to do. Well, that thrilled me, because as a matter of fact, you can follow this same process in your life just by stages, almost like a ladder going up. And you can find out that when you begin to slow down spiritually, when things begin to be cast over with sort of a dull, indifference or something like that, all that is needed is something to tear that away. And when it's torn away, then everything comes new and fresh and with power. And the reason that most of us don't tear that because we're not expendable. Because we don't put ourselves out on a daring front where you're up against something and you have to do something about it. As an old warhorse of civic righteousness said, and oh, how I loved this man and what he stood for. One time when they were discussing, well, why don't people have more faith? And he said, well, I'll tell you one reason people don't have more faith, and that is because they don't undertake anything that requires any faith. See? And so, folks, we've got a job. We've got a wonderful opportunity to throw ourselves out, to test God. What is it that he says? Try me now, and see if I will not pour out such a blessing upon you that there will not be room enough to receive. Now, the place where we've got to throw it is different in every one of our lives. You've got to pick that thing out. But let's do it. Let's begin to do the daring thing. Now, not foolhardy. That is, when I say that, I mean we need to do these things under the guidance of God. But God is whispering to us all the time. And the only reason we don't hear his voice is because of the insulations that we've put up there. I don't know. Did I mention to you folks before a story about Herman Hagedorn and the bomb that fell on America?
I don't believe so, no.
Well, if I did and I get going, why you cut me off. But Herman Hagedorn, how many of you have read the poem, The Bomb That Fell on America? Isn't it a tremendous thing? It's tremendously powerful. I'd recommend every one of you get that. It's put out in the paper edition. I think it's only $1. Herman Hagedorn. Herman Hagedorn is a noted writer. He is said to have written the best biography of Teddy Roosevelt that has been written, and he wrote a recent biography of Schweitzer, the prophet in the wilderness, wasn't that? And he's written some wonderful things. But this was written shortly after our country dropped the bomb at Hiroshima. And he reacted, as all sensitive souls reacted at the time, I'm sure, with a quaking of horror. I don't know how you felt, but I know that I just sort of went sick inside. And so he began to write, and he poured out the reaction of this feeling, and of what we were heading into without realizing what we were doing. And he stated the problem. And then he had the problem down there. No answer. No solution. He tried and threw it away. And he tried again. He tried a half a dozen times and just got nowhere at all on the solution. There it was, half done, unfinished. And so he has been greatly influenced by the Oxford group and by the moral rearmament. And and he had a couple of daughters who were with the moral rearmament at their camp at Mackinac. So he decided he'd get on the train and go down there and see them. So he did, and when he arrived, he had dinner with them that first evening, and then there was some kind of a production that they were putting on that night, because they put on these dramatic presentations of this truth that we're all interested in, and so he was going to take that in that evening. But as he was at dinner with his daughters, after a little bit, one of them spoke up and said, "Dad, you don't look so hot. Are you all right?" Oh, he said, I'm all right. But you see, the same thing had happened to him that happens to so many of us. We get covered over with these things that don't belong. And but then the second one spoke up after a little bit. And she said, and I think this was the youngest one. She said, well, Dad, how long has it been since you've tested yourself on the 4 absolutes? Well, you know, the Oxford group talk about absolute love and absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and what is the other one? Absolute honesty. Absolute honesty. And believe me, it's a real test. Try and put yourself up against those absolutes. Well, he didn't like this. Having his youngest child ask him how long it had been since he had... But you see, she was acting on the basis of the Spirit. And he brushed it aside in some way, but at the end of the meal he said, well, he was rather tired from this journey, and he didn't believe he'd go to the production. Now that wasn't strictly honest either, but he wasn't going because he was perturbed inwardly. And so he said he went upstairs to his room. And he said that this thing just threw him to his knees. And incidentally, he was telling me this during the all-night of prayer at Winnipesaukee summer before last. And he had read the first part of this poem in one of the opening hours of that. And then I'd gone back to my room for something, and I came back along about 2 o'clock, and I saw him, and I stopped in there, and we shared together and prayed together, and he told me about this. And he said that he never went through such a house cleaning in his life. That it just... He said he had thought that, well, we all get that idea. Well, we're pretty good, you know, because we've had some kind of an experience, and then we go along, and a little thing is achieved here and there, and we mix it all up. We think we have something to do with it, rather than realizing that all in all the world that we have to do is just to be an open channel. And after he had gone through that cleansing, and he said it lasted until midnight, from 8 o'clock until midnight. He said he finally stood up, and he said the whole solution just came like a rush. And he sat down and he wrote the thing right out almost without mistake. And he says, if you read section 2 in that, he said, you'll see that all it is autobiography. And that's the reason it's great. That's the reason it's really got something. The way to life is narrow. But I think that the thing that I want to close with is a little incident that has always thrilled me. Somehow it seems to catch all these things up together. This may not be true at all. I've been told by some people that it isn't, but that it's just a piece of fiction. But perhaps some of you have read the story of where this fellow had been a criminal, something like our Starr, and a bank robber. Something happened that led him to decide to go straight. And so he got a job in a bank, someplace where he wasn't known, and worked his way up until he was cashier of the bank. And then fell in love with the daughter of the president of the bank and married her. And they had a happy, lovely home. And he used to think back often and say, well, what a fool I was for so many years to go this other way. And how wonderful it is now to be a respected member of a community. And they had a little girl, and he just loved that little child with all of his heart. And one day, his wife and the little girl came into the bank near closing time to wait for him so that they could go out and do a little shopping together. And so when they came in, he said, "Well, just a few minutes, dear, and I'll be with you." And so after a little bit, he said, "All right, I'm ready." And so he said, "Where's Sally?" And they couldn't find Sally. So they finally realized that the vault door had been closed, and apparently Sally was inside of the vault. And it was a time lock or something of the sort, so that it couldn't be opened until the morning, and the whole implication seemed to be that she'd be dead by the morning. So here was this man. He knew that he could open the vault and save his little girl. He knew that if he did, that he'd be marked. All of his past would be revealed. Now, put yourself in that position. How easy it would be to rationalize and say, well, maybe it's better that she pass out this way. Because if we save her and she knows that her father is an ex-convict, that'll ruin their lives more than if she were to die now. It's awfully easy for the mind, you see, to seek ways out and around, to try and seek an easy way to avoid the issue. But the pull on his heart was too strong. And so this struggle, intense, took only a few minutes. And then he said, "Quick, get me some sandpaper." And then, according to the account, he took this sandpaper and he rubbed down the tips of his fingers until they were so sensitive that they could almost feel a current of air against them. And then he laid them against the vault door, and he kneeled there and began swiftly to turn the dials, and these sensitive fingers could feel what was happening on the inside when a lock would, or a bolt, whatever it is, would drop. And so after working intensely for maybe a half an hour, he stood back and threw open the door, and his little girl rushed out into his arms. And they all embraced for a moment, and then he turned, because he was aware that there had been a police officer that had come in and had been watching him. And that this police officer knew who he was with this revealing action. So he turned to this officer and said, "Well, all right, you may as well take me." Well, I'm always interested, what would you have done if you'd been the police officer? What would your heart have impelled you to do? What's the purpose of imprisonment? Is it just to imprison somebody? Well, the police officer did what I think every one of us would have done. said, well, I don't know you. I don't know what you're talking about. You see, he'd met the test. He'd gone through the narrow way. He'd been willing to give up everything and to go back into the prison to save his little girl. But by that very act, he had proved himself worthy of everything that life had. So, folks, I'm not suggesting that we go out and rob a bank, but let's go out and do something daring. Let's be willing to throw ourselves up against those barriers so that the power of God can be tested and used. And then power will come. Power will come. Our world will be saved. And as we enter into this Lenten period, it seems to me that that's an appropriate time to think about these things. And to remember that Jesus had to do exactly the same thing. And in connection with thinking about these things, the last thing that he said has had a new meaning for me when he said, "It is finished." You see, he'd gone all the way through. He'd done everything. And that's the answer. So when we try these dangerous things, these daring things, let's go through until we can say, it's finished. I've let go everything. I've done everything. The rest is up to you, God. Well, thanks a lot. Let's have a word of prayer, shall we? Oh, dear Heavenly Father, we know that thy love is over all, and in all and through all. Oh, help us to tear aside everything that we hold between ourselves and thee, and to be willing to be sent forth by thy love into the world, and to set ablaze every resistance to thee, so that thy world may come in to thy kingdom. Through us to Jesus, and through him to thee. Help us to take the narrow way